On behalf of myself and Rachel and Cheryl and Aaron Lieberman, we'd like to welcome everybody to our annual Just One Life Shir. It's really an honor for us to host this shir. It's an honor for us to have this amazing organization in our home. It's really incredible for us to have Rabbi Jacobson, who's not here yet and can't hear my introduction, but he'll be here any minute. I'm just going to talk a little slower. Rachel and I met Rabbi Jacobson a year ago on vacation, and it turned out that our night activity every night ended up being listening to Rabbi Jacobson. So I hope everybody's going to enjoy him tonight as much as we did. I want to read just a very quick letter that someone literally just wrote me about a half hour ago. I thought it was very apropos that I read it out loud. Azi Yasher Koach on tonight's parlor meeting for the benefit of Just One Life, an organization that I have been involved with since its inception some 30 plus years ago. I wish Hatzlacha to you and your efforts on behalf of the babies who will be saved tonight. It's really no small thing. When Rabbi Katz first approached me many years ago on this crisis that women in Israel who had unwanted pregnancies, they had nowhere to turn for counseling, financial help, postpartum issues, and the answer was inevitably abortion. At the time, I believe the figure was 30,000 abortions annually. I remember at the time, I went to my Rav, Rav Menachem Breyer Zatzal, the Biana Rav's father, to ask him about this mission. On the spot, he said, "Every child saved is another defender for Israel and a soldier in Sahel." He made it very simple. I have known Rabbi Katz for over 50 years, and he has dedicated his life to fund for this cause and to do this holy work. So without further ado, here's Rabbi Katz.
That can only be the other co-chairman, Steve Adelsberg. This is a first for me. I just want you to understand, truthfully. Can everybody hear me? I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to say. And by the way, when you deal with Rabbi Y.Y. as a yeka, totally 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. And before I know what he says, listen, you know what I told you about speaking 4 minutes? You stretched it to 6 minutes. Rabbi Y.Y. is not here. Take as long as you want. But I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to speak a little differently, but I first would like to say thank you to the Mandels and the Liebermans, who've become friends of myself and friends of Just One Life. Thank you to the entire committee, really, Ashreichem. In the midst of Teaneck, the chairman, founder, and dreamer, Jack Forgash, actually Jack and Carol. I think you figured out already, Rabbi Y.Y. has done amazing preparation for this evening and deserves a real shout, really. Stewie Forgash was there every second just to help. And he couldn't make it tonight, but I have to tell you, Moshe Kindelera is a very special Jew, a Jew who truly cares about every cause in Yiddishkeit, and I actually know him a very long time, so you could give him an applause so I could say, I'm speaking a little differently, and I'm taking off my watch, even though I may finish and Rabbi Jacobson's not here. I got back from Israel, so I'm a little charged up. Often I'm asked, so what do you do? Who are you? How do you do it? And who does it for you? You see, I'm only the shaliach with Jack and Steve, where we try to raise the funds and ship it to Israel for the needs. So who are we? We empower women. We empower pregnant women in crisis. We help them make decisions. We counsel these women. We're able to give them funding and beyond funding, as you will see. So how do we do it? We're a menu. We're not just one item. We're an address for every aspect of pregnancy. I need you to understand this. If there's depression in a home, we sometimes receive these cases. If there's a possibility that a family has an expectant mother who may miscarry, and thus there's a problem also they may have of funds, we could get the case. If there's an abusiveness situation, we could get a case. If somebody's ambivalent, what do? I can't cope, we could get the case. And how do we receive the case? Not because somebody knocks on the door in King George and says, I am here. Ladies and gentlemen, it's run professionally. There's a executive vice president, director Chaya Katzin. There are 2 social workers part of a team. There are volunteers. And they make an assessment of each client, what is needed, what kind of therapy is needed. I was asked the question, how many hours of therapy does Just One Life, Nefesh Echad B'Yisrael, give out in Israel on a weekly basis? It could be 15, it could be 20, it could be 25, it could be 30. Multiply that by a year, and you could already see the numbers. Yes, we have cases where a mother's expecting mother, the husband is abusive, she's out of the house, the baby may have a heart problem. Chaya Katzin makes a determination based on the referral, and the referral could come from Yerushalayim, it could come from Netanya, it could come from Beersheba, it could come from Gilo, it could come from Geula, yes, Geula. It could come from anywhere. Any issue in pregnancy that's in crisis, which causes tensions, we have somehow been able to perfect a certain formula. We could have a situation where I said, somebody's going to miscarry, God forbid. They have to be off their feet. And a determination is made what therapy is given. Now, let me just tell you about the staff. One is an expert in what's called cognitive behavioral therapy. I don't know what that means, truthfully. One is an expert in what's called psychotherapy. And the other is an expert in drama therapy. Drama therapy. Based on this, we're also advocates. We could figure out which office in Yerushalayim or other cities can help with other therapists, other people to come in and help, people to babysit. It's not just a money game. It's also something involved in how to create stability. One of my favorite cases I talk about, it's a different kind of a case. This family was stable. There were no problems, no abusiveness, nothing, no problem. She didn't know where to go. They needed more money. He turned to Madeline Gittleman, who's the founding executive vice president, now chair lady of the board. And he and his wife said, I have 3 jobs. I'll take another one. We took out $300. Could you imagine? We invested $300. This man was taught another job, to pick up the garbage in 5 parks in Yerushalayim, but he had dignity. We try to deal with the family, a wholesomeness in the family. I want that understood. Our motto is love. Our motto is ultimately, can these people, these clients, fend for themselves? We're able to give out $1,800, $2,000, $1,500, some follow-up. We send them to other agencies. I was asked a question, so how many diapers do you think you give out a year? I don't know, $1 million, $500,000, $250,000? I don't know. I was asked, what about the bottles of milk? I have no idea. I can't really tell you. Thousands and thousands and thousands of ounces. I was asked a question, I'm going to say it bluntly, do you help the single mother? With the psak of Rav David Feinstein, who was our posek, with the psak of Rav Palm beforehand, with my private conversations with Rav Herschel Schechter, Rav Mordechai Willig, and Rav Meir Goldwicht, we help the single mother with pride, because that's Hatzalah. We saved 18,000 babies. There are triplets all around. There are pictures from my last trip. There are triplets. 3 sets of triplets in a few months. Quadruplets, how old do you think our quadruplets are? 20 years old. The doctors told this mother, a Haredi mother, please fetal reduce. Somehow we got involved. Somehow Kadosh Baruch Hu decided that Jack asked questions. And the next thing we knew, an unbelievable doctor who's part of our founding board, Shimon Glick, gets involved. Madeleine Gittleman gets involved. They look at the data. They call Jack and say, we don't see it. We spoke to the mother. Those 4 boys, those quads, ladies and gentlemen, they're 20 years old. And this rabbi got on a plane for their bar mitzvah and flew to Israel. We have partnerships with Shaarei Tzedek who give us cases. Partnerships with Hadassah. Donnie Danone gave Jack a special letter endorsing us. This is our mission. This is who we are. We empower. We advocate. We love. We fend and help families. Kadosh Baruch Hu should keep continuing giving us the koach that we could just keep doing what we do. And Ashreichem. I'd like to recognize some of my friends and colleagues from actually my days in Yeshiva University. I saw Rav Adler when we were by the Rav together, Rav Ganak, of course. Okay, and I'm going to say Rabbi Karasik, because we were by Rav Soloveitchik together also. He's not a Rav of a shul, but he was a Rav of a shul. Please get involved. You'll walk around, you'll see the pictures floating of the babies. See myself, Jack. We need help to build kindergartens. Last note, how many kindergartens a year? 20 kindergartens. With a formula of love, no dogma, no yelling, no screaming, or as Jack has often said, we're pro-chance. I don't give long introductions when I introduce unbelievably special people. Now, you think I may know Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson for a very long time. We met on the phone yesterday or 2 days ago. Usually he spends 15 minutes. I must have the personality. He was on the phone with me for about 45 minutes. What do I say to introduce him? There's a lot. But I'm going to tell you two quick stories. One, he spoke in Queens where I live. And there's one piece of what he said which was still resonating. In a 2 or 3 day span, he spoke to Satma, YU, Yeshivas Haredi, Chabad, and I probably left out. All. And everybody basically said, teach me more. 2, every day in the morning when we say our brachas, we talk about chasodim and Talmud Torah. It's very rare to have somebody who's an amazing Ben Torah, a breath of Torah, who's impacted in a certain way by the chasodim. Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson and Rabbi Y.Y. receives anywhere between 50 to 200 to 300 emails a day. And believe me, they're not emails that says, Rabbi Jacobson, you're great, you're terrific. It's help me, I need help. It's unbelievable. And somehow, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. This gadol figures out how to do it. Rabbi Y.Y., Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Marty, for your very kind words. I was at a dinner once when they introduced Senator Joseph Lieberman to the pulpit, and somebody was extolling his virtues ad infinitum. He got up and said, "It's a pity my parents are not here this evening. My father would have appreciated these words. My mother would have believed them." But I do thank you for your somewhat dramatic but very kind introduction. I want to thank our dear hosts, the Mandels, who I had the privilege to meet, when was it, last summer? We're in Banff, right? Thank you for opening your home and your hearts. It's a pleasure to see you and your wife again. I want to thank the Lieberman family and Reb Josh and all of you who are here this evening, gracing us with your presence on behalf of this extraordinary organization and how do we define you? and the enthusiastic, passionate dedication, selfless love, charisma of our dear Rabbi Marty and everybody who's involved in this special organization. You know, they ask an old question: why is it that in Hebrew the Jewish greetings are very strange? They're never reciprocal. For example, I say Shalom Aleichem, and the response is Aleichem Shalom, which is peace unto you peace. Why don't you just say Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem? I mean, imagine in English, if I say good evening and you say evening good, or how are you, you are how, or what's up what's. It's a bissel meshiga, it's a little insane, but in Hebrew we do it all the time. So I once heard myself from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who said that because when two Jews meet, even before they start a conversation, they have to get into an argument. So I say to you, Shalom Aleichem, and the first response is, you have it absolutely wrong. It's the exact opposite. It's Aleichem Shalom. Once we have established that we are in a disagreement, now perhaps we can have a conversation, and maybe even shalom, maybe even a peaceful conversation. I once heard from the great Kabbalist Jackie Mason. He's a guy who repeats my jokes, and he once said that if two Jews meet and within 5 minutes they don't establish a family connection, one of them is probably not Jewish, which is usually the case. I travel the world, and wherever I go, you must be related to my third cousin, to my mother-in-law, and the first Gilgal, whatever. But I would add that if two Jews meet and within a few minutes there's no disagreement, probably one of them should convert. We are an argumentative people, let's face it. Although we all say, Hashem Roi, the Lord is our shepherd, I've still not found Jews who consider themselves sheep. He's my shepherd, but we're not exactly the sheep. Jews have very, very strong opinions. I once heard from Elie Wiesel, who said we fight about everything. We have sophisticated names for our fighting. We fight with the world, we call it sociology. We fight with God, we call it theology. We fight with ourselves, we call it psychology. I once saw a debate between Amos Oz, the famous leftist Israeli writer, and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs from Britain. And Amos Oz began, he said, probably on many areas that we will be exploring tonight, I disagree with Rabbi Sachs. But come to think about it, I usually also, on most areas, disagree with myself. So we are a people who are very, very opinionated. It's been like this for thousands of years, and it's like this till this very day, I think in almost every Jewish community in the world. The Sfas Emes writes that in Parsha Shmos, the first two stories about our first leader, Moshe, are very telling. The first story is Moshe goes out when he grows up, and he sees an Egyptian beating a Jew. He turns here, he turns there, nobody's there, and he kills him and he saves the Jew. Vayetze bayom hasheni. He goes out the second day. This time, he doesn't see an Egyptian beating a Jew. He sees a Jew about to beat a Jew. And he says, Rosh lama sakreyecha, why you want to kill each other? And they respond to him, who died and made you king? Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? And Moshe becomes a fugitive. And the Sfas Emes says, for the first encounter, he knew exactly what to do. The second encounter, he couldn't find a solution. And the Sfas Emes basically says that exile produces two different casualties. Casualty number one is non-Jews who don't like Jews. Casualty number two is Jews who don't like Jews. For the first one, the target is pretty clear and definitive. Anti-Semitism is always a crisis and always a tremendous challenge to this very day when it once again rears its ugly head. But there's something much more subtle and sometimes even more lethal, and that is the infighting of the Jewish people. And for this, he says, Moshe says the second day, he doesn't have a solution. He has to run away. Even Moshe himself had to confront this. And if you look at the three exiles that Jews experienced throughout our history, you'll see how each one began. The first one began when Joseph and his brothers couldn't communicate. Lo yachlu echav dabroi l'shalom. They couldn't speak to him peacefully. It ended up that they sold him as a slave, and in turn they all became slaves, because what you do to others usually happens to you at some point. In the second story, King Solomon dies, Rechavam takes over, the kingdom is split into a southern and northern kingdom, and ultimately it hastens the demise of both kingdoms. The 10 tribes are exiled, they're gone till today, and the last 2 tribes of Israel ultimately are destroyed. The fabric of the Jewish civilization is weakened. And then in the third story of exile, in the second temple, the Talmud famously says that the Jews, more than they were busy fighting the enemy Rome, they were busy fighting each other within the siege of Jerusalem, what the Talmud calls in Yuma Sinas Chinam, tremendous, profound, baseless hatred, which causes destruction. So the 3 exiles in Jewish history, the first one as a little family, the second one with the Churban of Bayis Rishon, and then Churban Bayis Sheni, were directly or indirectly caused by this internal Jewish strife. And yet, despite that, it often seems like such a powerful, powerful force in Jewish life. The fact remains that I think, if I'm not mistaken, just from my traveling around the world, that the last few years, I would say the last decade, have seen a very positive transformation in this area. When I was growing up as a kid, there's a few people in the crowd who know where I come from, when there was particular strife and contention between certain Jewish communities, and if you would stand up in a shul and attack somebody, you would actually become popular overnight. It was actually a very easy way to become popular. You had a target, you became a zealot, you declared yourself as Pinchas, you had a spear, hopefully a verbal one, and you became popular overnight. Today, especially with the youth, it's not very popular. If somebody gets up and starts attacking and criticizing, people get disgusted from it. There is a consciousness. I feel it's a very positive thing. I know we like kvetching and complaining about how bad things are, but I think actually this is a tremendous transformation that I personally have seen. I have the schus and privilege to travel to communities all over the world, and sometimes in the morning I'll daven, as you said, in Monroe, and in the afternoon I'll daven in Yeshiva University, not on Yom Ha'atzmaut, but other days. And It's very interesting. It's very interesting to see. I think there has been a very powerful evolution in terms of consciousness, and especially at this time of the year, I think it's very appropriate to focus on this, especially that we're here for a cause that is all about that type of unity. And I think the core issue is it's not only with our people. It begins, I think, in families, in homes, and marriages. It's very hard to find the only marriages that I know that are perfect are the marriages that I don't know well. Present company, of course, excluded. When I was in Silicon Valley, they wanted to know whether computers were masculine or feminine, because in Kabbalah everything is masculine or feminine. So I said that I think that computers are masculine because they retain enormous amounts of data, and yet they remain clueless. On the other hand, I said I thought computers were feminine because nobody besides the engineer understands their composition. And when one computer communicates with another one, just stay out of the conversation. It's code language, it's very cryptic. Then I said, I think computers are masculine because you buy this model and you think it's gorgeous and beautiful and perfect and awesome, and you're so excited, and you realize if you would have waited 6 months, you could have done much, much better and for much, much cheaper. Then I said, I think computers are feminine because you come home with this computer, it's beautiful, it's a machaya, it's excellent, and you're so excited about it, and it's a great deal. And it was also pretty cheap, and then within a few weeks you realize you're paying 20 times the amount for accessories. So they asked me, what's the verdict? Is it masculine or feminine? I said, I think the verdict is feminine because computers forget nothing. Every time you press a key, every move you make, every breath you take gets enshrined into that computer for eternity. If not in the software, in the hardware, if not in the hardware, in the hard drive, not in the hard drive, in the chip, but somewhere it's there, and one day it will emerge and virus you. So it's always the micro. The micro is always a very powerful reflection of the macro. What are the principles? What are the guiding principles for a couple, for peace on the micro level in our own homes? What are the ingredients for that? Well, that's more than a short lecture about the ingredients. Some people spend 20 years in therapy to figure that out. There was once an AT&T salesman. He came to a house. He rings the bell. The guy comes out. AT&T says, we have this great new deal on our phones, but I got to speak to the master of the house. Who's the master of the house? The guy says, wow, you knew exactly when to come. Wait up 6 minutes. This exact question is being decided in the kitchen right now as we speak. But what are some basic principles that mature people understand and that are really part of the living legacy of Judaism for that type of peace that the sages spoke about when they said in the Maseches Sota, page 17, Begematria Toiv, Ish v'isha zachu, Shechina shruya beineim, that there's the divine presence that dwells. Number one, we all could see it from the opposite. The breakdown between Yosef and his brothers started when they stopped talking to each other. When instead of talking to each other, we drift away. I run to my place, you run to your room, I run to my office, I go back to my phone texting. Lo yachlu dabru. They cannot speak anymore. Don't stop speaking. You always have to speak. Argue, but speak. Try to argue less, but don't stop speaking. Don't start ignoring each other, because then we grow apart like this, but then every day it gets more and more and more. Don't stop speaking. You have to communicate with each other. Extremely important. Number two, Shema Yisrael, you have to listen to each other. Shema. And it's not easy for us to listen. We're our great speakers. Look who's talking. But listening is much harder. But in listening, there's real growth. Do you really listen? Do you know how to listen to your husband? Do you know how to listen to your wife? Do you know how to listen to your children? Shema, to actually listen. In listening, great things happen. To really just listen to the other person without judgment, without ridicule, without developing your opinion. Just to listen. Number three, listening also means try to understand, seek to understand where the other person is coming from. Not just listen to your words, but actually try to see it from the other person's perspective. We all know the Gemara Maseches, is it Erev in page 13? Why was the verdict like Beis Hillel, not like Beis Shammai? Why? It says, Noichin va'aluvin hayu. They were very fine people, humble, refined. But l'loyoid elisha magdimin divrei Beis Shammai l'divrehen. They always put first the words of their opponent. You look through the whole Mishnah, there's something fascinating. The Mishnah was edited by a descendant of Hillel, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who was from Beis Hillel, who follows the verdict of Hillel. It's his family. And yet in every debate between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, who's quoted first? In every Mishnah, beginning in the first chapter of Brachas, always the opponent first. That's exactly the point. They listened. And they sought to understand the other one. They always sought to understand the other one. That is a very powerful tool in life. And then there is, don't seek victory. Don't seek victory. What often happens is we get into these vendettas, and I want to win you, and you want to win me. But if I try to defeat you, you're going to try to defeat me, and we will both lose. The moment we get into that cycle, everybody loses. Don't seek victory over your spouse. Don't seek victory over your husband. I know you want to. I know it's tempting, but nobody gains. I'll score one, you'll score one. Everybody loses. What we want to seek is what's the benefit for the family? What's the benefit for the home? What's the benefit for the Jewish people? And then there's another very important component, and that is you don't have to disagree with me, but don't stop caring about me. Care about me. You don't have to agree with me, I should say, but don't stop caring about me. A couple doesn't always have to agree. If you're a Jewish couple, it's impossible. The Netziv says, Loi toiv heyoisa adam levada esa loi ezer kenegdai. What's ezer kenegdai? Sometimes the greatest help in life is from somebody who has a position which is against you. So that's part of a marriage. We have different positions. That's not the issue. The issue is when I don't feel trusted and I don't feel trust. if I could trust you and you can trust me, if I know that you care for me, you love me, you cherish me, then even when we disagree, repair is always possible. So there's that element of caring. I saw this great chapter in a book by Professor Irving Yalom. He's an old therapist, like the guru of marriage therapy in San Francisco. He's an old Jew. He's like in his 90s. And he has a book, I think, called The Way of Therapy or something. And he has a chapter there I once read where he tells a story about a woman who came to him. And she expressed her regret about something that happened in her life. It was so telling. She was having a difficult relationship with her father. Her father was a very disagreeable type of person. You know those types of people? You say yes, they say no. Shalom aleichem, aleichem shalom. He was uptight. He was usually argumentative. He could just not agree with her. It was just very hard for him to agree. Anyway, she was getting married, and she wanted to make peace with her father. She just wanted to be on better terms. So she offered her father to go on a road trip near San Francisco. And they get into the car, and she's driving, and he's in the passenger seat. And she's driving by a particular road, and she looks out the window to her left, and there's this most beautiful, gorgeous landscape. And she turns to her father and says, Tati, Daddy, look out your window. There is this most exquisite, gorgeous landscape. And he looks out his window and he says, cesspool. Disgusting, horrible. And she picks up her hands, this one like, here he goes again. He can't even agree that it's a beautiful landscape. And the trip was over. They just went home. She said, I can't deal with them. 30 years pass. She's driving with her husband, and suddenly they're on the same road. What did Yogi Berra say? Deja vu all over again. But this time, he's driving and she's in the passenger seat. And suddenly, you know how you come back to a place where you had a very intense experience 30 years ago, and everything comes right back to you? The same butterflies. You know what I'm talking about? You don't have to remind yourself. That energy is just always there. It remained there with you. You're looking at me like you don't know what I'm talking about. Really? Sure. You come back and you know exactly how you felt and what bothered you, even if you have the worst memory in the world, because it's like this repressed energy that's stored somewhere in your system, and it just comes all out. It was all right there when they came onto the road. And what happens? Her husband says, wow, this is a beautiful landscape. She looks out her window and she sees that on her side, there's a cesspool. There's a sewer system 30 years later. She comes to a therapist. Of course, that's the Jewish thing to do. She runs into the therapist. And she says, you wouldn't believe it. My father was not trying to disagree with me. My father was just looking out his own window. I wish I could go to him, but he's dead. And I read this story and I saw, wow, how powerful. My father was not trying to disagree with me. He was just looking out through his window. How many couples experience this issue? There are two windows through which people see life. Can you really get your husband to look out your window? No. Can you really get your wife to see life through your window? Absolutely not. But it's fine as long as you can respect that there is another window, and as long as you can be curious to what life looks like through your window. I do not need to create one window and destroy the second window. I don't have to delegitimize your window. What I do need to is respect the fact that there is another window. Show curiosity, inquisitiveness. Listen. And the most important thing is, don't delegitimize me, my feelings, my opinions, just because I look out another window. And probably the last and maybe central idea is to remember that there is something transcendent that unites you. You're a couple. You have to respect the institution we call family, marriage. It's a sacred institution. It's the reason why for 4,000 years the family in Jewish life has been so powerful, because marriage in Judaism is sacred. It's not just a nice thing if it works out. When does it work out? You have to work very hard on it working out. 50% of the time it doesn't. It's sacred, it's divine. And because it's God's plan for the world, when we remember that there's something larger than our egos, it's not just about my needs and my moods. There is something transcendent here. It allows us to see each other that way and work towards those things that connect us and unite us. And I think these principles are so powerful because they relate to the individual couple, but they also relate to Klal Yisrael, to the Jewish people. I don't know if we will come till Mashiach comes to a time when all Jews will agree. It's impossible. Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, Zechet Tzadik Livracha, Rabbi Soloveitchik once shared an incredible insight into a Tosfos in the tractate Menachos. The Talmud discusses a person who has two heads, what they do with tefillin. So Tosfos tells a story there about this fellow. It's a classic Jewish story. This fellow had two heads, and their father died, and their father left a lot of real estate on Madison Avenue and Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. Tosfos doesn't use that street. So he comes to Shlomo HaMelech and he says, I have two heads, so I deserve a double portion of real estate because I am two people, right? So what does Shlomo HaMelech do? He blindfolds one of the heads and he pours hot cholent on the other one. And he says, let's see, if the head that's blindfolded screams, we know it's one person. He only gets one part of the inheritance. If the other one head doesn't scream, then we know it's two separate organisms, two separate people. He gets a double portion of the inheritance. Of course, he pours the hot cholent. It wasn't too hot. Don't worry about it. And the other head screams. And King Solomon says, oh, one person. Shine, you don't get a double part of the inheritance. Have a wonderful day. And Rav Soloveitchik asked, what type of story is this? And he gave a very profound explanation. He said, it's a metaphor for the Jewish people. We don't have one head. We have multiple heads. 3 Jews, 19 opinions. We don't have one head. We don't have one way of looking at things. The Mishnah says in Sanhedrin 37, Ein deyoseh and Shabbos. No two people have the same mindset. We don't think the same. Every person has their own way of looking at the world. That's not the issue. The issue is when you pour hot water on one head, does the other head scream? If when you pour hot water on one head, the other head screams, now you know it's a single organism. It's one person. But when you pour water on one head and the other one doesn't utter a peep, he says, now you know it's two separate organisms, two separate people. That's the danger. The problem is not two heads. The problem is when I stop caring. I don't care. Hot water goes on your head and I'm detached. I'm apathetic. They once asked a Jew, what's the difference between ignorance and apathy? And he said, I don't know and I don't care. It was one of the most extraordinary moments. It happened a century ago. Some of you are maybe familiar with the Beilis trial. You're familiar with the Beilis trial. There was a man named Menachem Mendel Beilis. He lived in Kiev in Ukraine. And he was accused before Pesach of 1911 slaughtering a Christian child to use for blood and matzah, the famous blood libels. Jews couldn't believe that in 1911, which they thought was already the modern era, and all anti-Semitism is coming to an end. Of course, today we know better. Nobody could believe this. And he was imprisoned for years, and then there was a huge court case with this accusation that Beilis killed this Christian boy who was found dead, stabbed to death in 1911 near Kiev. Now, Mendel Beilis he had 5 children. He was a secular Jew. He came from a Hasidic family. But the court case was world renowned. At the court case, the prosecution brought up every verse, every piece of Mishnah, Talmud, Zohar, Kabbalah, the writings of the Arizal, Medrash, Halacha, Rishonim, Achronim, Musar, Machshava, to prove that Jews would kill a Christian child. And the prosecution one day in court brought up the following statement in Talmud. Tractate Yevamis, I think page 61, Samach Aleph. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says, Adam ki yamus ba'ohel. There is an impurity that comes from being under the same roof with a corpse. No touching and no carrying. Just being under the same roof creates a spiritual ritual impurity called tumas meis. Says Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, it's only true if you're under the same roof with a Jewish corpse, not a Gentile corpse. Why? Because it says, Adam ki yamus ba'ohel. We read it a few weeks ago. Atem kruyim Adam ve'enu mesoilam kruyim Adam. You are called Adam. The nations of the world are not called Adam. And the prosecution said, you see, this is what their sages teach. This is what their children grow up with. The Jews are called Adam. The Gentiles are not called Adam. They're not people. If they're not people, of course you can slaughter them and murder them. At the stand was a man named Rabbi Yaakov Maza. Rabbi Yaakov Maza was the chief rabbi of Moscow. Maza, Mem Zayin Aleph Hey, is an acronym, Mizera Aaron HaKoyen. By the way, there's another famous Jew today whose name is Yaakov Maza. I mentioned him earlier. Jackie Mason. If you go to a Broadway show, his name is not Jackie Mason, his name is Yaakov Maza, but for Broadway, Yaakov Maza didn't work so well. So Yaakov became Jackie and Maza became Mason. Just for the record, little Jewish trivia. In any case, Rabbi Yaakov Maza was confronted with this question. Pretty powerful question. And this is what he said. They say that he heard it or he received it from Reb Meir Shapiro, who was then a rabbi in Poland, the founder of Daf Yomi. And he gave the following powerful insight. And he said as follows: in Hebrew, most words come in two types of, they come packaged in two ways, singular and plural, Yachid and Rabim, right? How do you say a man? Ish. Men, anashim. A woman, Isha. Women, Nashim. Shabbat is Shabbos. Many Shabbos is a Shapsos. Tapuach is an apple. Tapuchim are apples. Har is a mountain. Harim are mountains. Yom is a day. Yamim are days. You get the point. What about Adam? How do you say Adam in the plural? Adam is a human being. Adam, a mensch. How do I say many Adams? No word. Adamim, Adamos, doesn't work. In fact, the etymology of Adam is Adama, earth, which is in the plural. You have Admos, Admos Kodesh, but in Adam there's no plural. So if I want to refer to a nation, to a group of people, I can't use the term Adam because I cannot multiply it more than I could use Adam for one person. I cannot use Adam when I'm talking about a group. So if I want to speak about a group of people, a tribe, a community, a congregation, a nation, an empire, I cannot use the term Adam. What do I use? I can use the word Am, a nation, Ummah. I can use sometimes the word Shevet, Kahal, Tzibur, Anashim, Nashim, but I cannot use the word Adam for more than one person. It says this is the meaning of the words of the Talmud. Atem kruyim Adam, ve'ein umma sa'olam kruyim Adam. You can't call the American people Adam. There are 300 million people who live in this wonderful country. How do you say the word Adam? It's 300 million Adams. You can't say Adam. Adamim, we have no plural for Adam. There's one exception. There's one nation that may number 10 million or 15 million, or at that time it was 18 million, and you could still call them Adam. Which nation? The Jewish nation. Why? And Rabbi Yaakov Maza said, look at Mendel Bayless. He is sitting here on trial. But you know who is being accused of the murder? Not Mendel Bayless. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Maimonides, Rashi. Who ever heard of such a thing? So imagine a Russian peasant was accused of murdering a kid. Who would be on trial? The Russian peasant. Who's on trial here? Not Mendel Bayless. Every Tosfos, every Rashi, every commentator, every book that was written the last 3,000 years, why are they all on trial? He doesn't even know most of these sources. The answer is, you're called Adam. It's one person. He said, I want to ask you another question. If a Russian peasant was accused of murder, who would be in the court? Who would be in the court? He, his father, his mother, maybe an uncle, an aunt, a brother, and a lawyer. He says, who's now in the court? Thousands of Jews. And in England, they're fasting. And in America, they're saying Tehillim. And in Australia, they're gathering together for prayers. Nobody ever heard of Mendel Bayless. If he would have not been on trial, he would have died an anonymous person. Nobody would have ever known the name of this man. Why are they fasting in Great Britain in 1913? Because somebody is sitting in Kiev on trial. The answer is, Atem Kruyim Adam. It's not a nation of 18 million. It's a nation of one person. Adam. It's a large organism with many limbs, with many organs, but it's an Adam. If it's an Adam, one person, what happens to the pinky, the brain feels. What happens to the toe, the brain feels. It's one cohesive central nervous system. They listened. They vindicated. Menachem Mendel Bayless at the end was exonerated. But this insight, Atem kruyim Adam, ve'ein umas ha'olam kruyim Adam. A unique phenomenon. That's what Rav Soloveitchik said. Two heads, okay. The question is not if there's two heads. The question is when you pour hot water on one head, how does the other head respond? That makes all the difference. I once heard from Rabbi Nochem Lam, Shlita, Rabbi Norman Lam. He told me that he was once on the Pacific. He went on a cruise with his wife, summer 1976. Now today you have kosher cruises. You can have beautiful dinners with lectures, with daf yomis, and everything. But in 1976, if you went on a cruise and you wanted to keep kosher, you had to take doggy bags with some sardines and tuna. And he said that was the type of cruise he went on. He was on a cruise on the Pacific, beginning of July 1976. On the radio waves came the news, July 4th, you remember, about the rescue of the Entebbe hostages. And people couldn't believe it. People could not believe it. And the staff on the boat wanted to salute Israel. How do they salute Israel? So Dr. Lamb said on the boat there was a Jewish waiter who was completely assimilated. He had no affiliation with Jews or Jews anywhere. His name happened to be Mendel. It's a real Jewish name, but completely assimilated secular Jew. So the whole staff of the cruise took this man, this Mendel, this waiter, put him on their shoulders, and danced around the boat with him to celebrate Israel's rescue of the Entebbe hostages. And he said, I'm looking at the scene, I'm thinking to myself, what in the world does this Jewish, secular, assimilated waiter have to do with Yitzchak Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Yoni Netanyahu's work trying to get those hostages out of Entebbe? What is the connection? The answer, of course, is Atem Kruyim Adam. It's one Adam. We may not always be aware of it, but anybody else who looks at it sees it. Atem Kruyim Adam. There's a famous teaching of the Chayza of Lublin, the Seer of Lublin. There's a very interesting halacha. And he said, Mavdilin ba'oilas ha'oif ve'ein mavdilin b'chatos ha'oif. It's one of those complicated laws when it comes to sacrifices, which in a very simple expression means, for the ADDs, don't worry, it'll become clear in 6 seconds. Don't worry, you don't have to shut down yet. Mavdilin ba'oilas ha'oif ve'ein mavdilin b'chatos ha'oif means that when you bring birds as an offering, right? So you separated the head from the rest of the body by the oilas ha'oif, by a carbon oila, but not by a sin. And he said, you know, it's a funny thing. When Jews produce some great genius, I don't know, some Albert Einstein, who becomes the celebration of the world, mavdilin ba'oilas ha'oif, you say it's not because he's Jewish, he just happens to be a genius. But when it's chatas ha'oif, when it's a sin, ein mavdilin. Now suddenly everybody is guilty. They don't make a distinction. So when it comes to looking at that tremendous calamity that has plagued us for thousands of years, I think the micro can become a very powerful reflection of the macro. And that is, don't stop talking to each other. Jews have to talk to each other. We need to build bridges. It's so easy today, especially, to retreat to your own culture and hang out with people who look like you, think like you, agree with you, which is a normal human instinct. But don't stop talking. Number one. Number two, don't stop listening. It's very important to listen. Number three, try to understand the other person's perspective. Don't agree, chas v'shalom. That would be a violation of your Judaism. Don't agree, God forbid, ezer kenegdai. Remember, you got to remain kenegdai. But try to understand. Never seek victory. Don't seek victory. Whenever we seek victory, we both lose. I need a win, and then you need a win. I win today, you win tomorrow. Let's seek something else. Let's seek the goodness of the Jewish people. Whenever it becomes an issue of victory, look what happens in shuls, in communities, in mishpachas, how they fall apart. Because once people get into the vicious cycle, I'm going to win, it never ends. One of the greatest conflicts in Jewish history was the conflict between Rabbi Y.Y and Eibschitz, Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rabbi Yaakov Emden accused Rabbi Y.Y and Eibschitz of being a secret follower of Shapsi Tzvi. This is the 18th century. Some people even argue that the entire reform movement in Germany took root because of the way the rabbinate destroyed itself. in the great fights of Germany. There was a famous story about the divorce, the get of Kaliva, the get of, but that's not for tonight. You can ask Rabbi Genek, he'll give you a historical shiur on the get of Kaliva. Did I pronounce it correctly? And the second one was the war between Rabbi Y.Y and Eibschitz. Because the laymen look at this and they say, there's nothing to trust here. Which is why it's so important in Jewish leadership to be able to maintain a standard of deep respect, even if there's disagreement. They once asked Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rabbi Yaakov Emden was an Erlich Yid. He was a God-fearing Jew. But he was obsessed with Shabsai Tzvi. And Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz was a victim of his. And they say a story. I can't authenticate it because I just saw it quoted. I didn't see it in an original book of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. But they say a story that I once read, that they asked Rabbi Yaakov Emden years later, when the fight subsided, if the fight was l'shem shamayim, if the machlokas was for the sake of heaven. And he sighed and says, in the beginning, maybe. In the beginning, maybe. Even in the beginning, it was maybe. Afterwards, for sure not. What happens is, people's egos get so dragged into situations, it's impossible to deal with it. There's an old vart, Yaakov Avinu goes to sleep. You remember the story? And he wakes up, and he takes the stone, and he says, Ein Zakim Beis Elokim. This is a house of God. How do you know it's a house of God? Because the sages say that the rocks started to fight with each other. Everybody was saying he should put his head on me. So he got up and he said, a place where even the rocks fight has to be a shul. Ein Zakim Beis Elokim. Bergenfield excluded, of course. But some other places. Ein Zakim Beis Elokim. The rocks are fighting. So always, there's a very powerful insight from the Tzemach Tzedek, one of the great Hasidic masters, grandson of the Baal HaTanya. He said, what's the difference between children and adults? We say children are immature and adults are very mature, but is that really the case? Does your child ever say, Tati, I'm never speaking to you again in my life? 12 minutes later, he's your best friend after you gave him the ice cream. But an adult tells you, I'm not speaking to you again, and 12 years later, he still does not invite you to his grandson's bar mitzvah, doesn't invite you to the kiddush he made in shul, sees you and goes to the other side of the street. Children forgive like this. You remember? 6 minutes later, your best friend. Adults, 20 years later, we still carry grudges. Again, Bergenfield excluded. Why? And you know what he answers? He says something very profound. He says the difference between children and adults is children choose being happy over being right, and adults choose being right over being happy. Very often, I'll say to myself, I'll be miserable, but I'm going to be right. Come on, make that call. It's your sister. You haven't spoken to your sister. It's your brother. It's your mother. It's your nephew. It's your uncle. It's your brother-in-law. Just because you got the wrong bracha under the chuppah? Really? Or just because there was some will or whatever happens, usually a will or something else, just make a call. No, he's going to think he's right. I'd rather be miserable, but I'm going to be right. Children have a different philosophy. I don't need to be right. I need to be happy. Everybody has to ask that question in life. Do you need to be right or do you need to be happy? Especially when it comes to your spouse. Do you need to be right or do you need to be happy? If you need to be right, good luck. You can't be right. You know why? You're wrong. If you don't believe me, ask her. If you don't believe her, ask your mother-in-law. The question is not of who's going to be right. The question is who's going to be happy. And that's a whole different question. Never seek victory. That is always number 4. And then there's number 5. Give respect if you want respect. I cannot ask for respect if I don't give you respect. And then there is the 6th principle. Don't agree with me. Just care about me. We don't have to agree with other Jews, but we have to care about other Jews. We have to care about other Jews. Back to Rav Soloveitchik's 2 heads. You can have a different head, but we have to care about Jews. Fascinating phenomenon. In the sad days of the great fight between the Hasidim and their opponents, famously the Gaon of Vilna in the 18th century, there was a ban against the Hasidim Acherim. it was not signed by Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the greatest student of the Vilna Gaon. There's a biography of the Chassam Sofer called Chut HaMeshulash. And I once was reading the biography. It's one of the old biographies, which means there is some truth in it. Because modern biographies, a lot of them, you can't believe half of what it says. Because we have this Jewish thing that if you don't like a fact, right, you just make believe it never happened. Mishagas. I don't know why, but it does remind me of this American family, non-Jewish family, which traced its lineage back to ancestors who came here with the Mayflower. And they were very, very proud of themselves. They decided to write a book about this great, illustrious American, quintessential American family. But the researcher discovers the skeleton in the closet. And that is that great-great-uncle, right, whose name was Thomas, he was a criminal, a petty criminal, and he was executed on the electric chair. Now, if it will be a Jewish family, no problem. He never existed. It's fine. It works, right? But Gentiles don't have that luxury. So therefore, they had to put it into the books. It was a crisis. The writer says, don't worry, I'll deal with it. I will articulate history in an accurate way without compromising truth and without compromising the respect of the family. And sure enough, they buy the book, they open it up, and this is what he writes. He says, great-great-uncle Thomas occupied a very important chair in a central governmental institution. He was tied to his position with the strongest of cords. And despite all of his attempts, he could not tear himself away from that central chair that he occupied. His death came as a sudden shock. You have to know how to write history, history, his story. But this is an old biography. And he tells there a story, again. Do I know if it's an authentic story? I know enough about history that we don't know much about history. That's how much I know. But it's even if it's not accurate, the lesson is an extraordinary one. He says, why didn't Reb Chaim Volozhiner sign on the band that his own Rebbe, the Vilna Gaon, signed? And listen to what he writes. Fascinating story and a great insight. He says, they came to Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Chaim Volozhiner was the Rav of Volozhin, Rosh Yeshiva Volozhin, one of the greatest rabbis in Lithuania of the time, a genius of a man and a great pious Jew. And they ask him to sign on the ban, and he refuses. Reb Chaim Volozhiner refuses to sign, which he is not signed on it. And I know there are different theories. Rabbi Lam has a book called Torah Lishma. I think his doctorate, his PhD, and he has his own theory. There are other theories, but this is the story that this man writes. They asked Reb Chaim Volozhiner, why won't you sign on the ban? And he said, I can't excommunicate Jews. They said, but your Rebbe did sign. He said, my Rebbe, yeah, but not me. They said, but your Rebbe is a Malach Hashem Tzvaos. Your Rebbe is an angel of God. He said, I know he's an angel of God, but I still can't sign the ban. They said, but if an angel signs, why can't you sign? And listen to what he answered. This is a Gadol B'Yisrael. This is what he says. He says, every morning we tell the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And in that story, there's a curious anomaly. I don't know if you ever noticed. Who tells Avraham to go offer his son? Who summons him? And the answer is, Vahi acher advarim ha'ela, v'ha'elokim nisa es Avram. The Ribono Shalom tests Avram. He says, go, kachnas binches yichidcha, take your son, v'aleyu sham la'ola. Who tells him not to do it? He takes the sword to slaughter his son. Vayikra elav malach Hashem min hashamayim. Vayomer lav Avram, vayomer hineni, vayomer al tishlach yadcha. An angel of God calls out to him and says, do not lay your hand on the lad. Where did God disappear to? Went to Hawaii on vacation? Moved to New Jersey? You send Avram to go slaughter his son. Suddenly you're not around anymore. You send an angel that he shouldn't do it. It should have said, Vayikra Elokim, the same Elokim who sent him, should have stopped him. Reb Chaim Volozhiner said this answer. Open your hearts, my dearest friends. He said, if God wants to tell you not to slaughter a Jewish child, he can send an angel, that's good. But if God wants to command you to slaughter a Jewish child, He cannot send an angel. That will not cut it. He has to come himself and communicate that message. My master, my Rebbe is an angel. But even an angel, I cannot listen to when he tells me to slaughter another Jew. I have to listen to God himself, and therefore I cannot sign. A Jew from Montreal told me that he was at a Friday night dinner on Onik Shabbos, and the famous Reb Schneier Kotler Zatzal, son of Reb Aaron Kotler, Rosh Yeshiva of Beis Medrash Gavoa, BMG, was there. And he said something fascinating. He said, the Torah says, Los is godedu. Los is godedu means you're not allowed to scrape off your epidermis, your skin, as a sign of grief. It's in Parshas Re'eh in Deuteronomy. Los is godedu. Don't grieve in this way of scraping off your skin. You're not allowed to do that. But the Talmud says in Yevamos, page 13, Los is godedu means losasu agudas agudas. Don't splinter up into separate groups. So the Maharal, the Gurari, says, what's the connection between the two interpretations? Whenever there are two different interpretations on a verse, they're somehow connected. There is a thematic commonality between them. There's a pervasive thread. But here, it's completely disjointed. Don't scrape off your skin on a literal level, and then don't splinter into separate groups. And Reb Schneier said this. He said, the Jewish people are one organism. We're one body. When you splinter yourself off from another Jew, you know what you're doing? It's like you're scraping off your skin. You think you're damaging the other person, but really you're detaching yourself from a part of yourself. It's like when you get into a fight with your spouse, who are you really fighting with? It's not just she's miserable or he's miserable, you're both miserable. If you're not on speaking terms with a child, with a close friend, with a sibling, it's all one. I could make believe I'm detached, but I'm not detached. I'm attached. So he said, Loises goidedu. The Talmud is really just deciphering and elaborating on what it means. It's not just literally scraping off your skin on a physical level. It's also on an emotional level, on a mental level, on a psychological level, on a spiritual level, and on a subconscious level, because there is a unified organism. So don't agree with me, but don't stop caring about me. We could look out through two different windows. That's fine. But don't deny that there's another window and hate me for it, and separate from me, and stop trusting me, and feel that you have to delegitimize me. It's not always easy, but it's critical, it's vital. It's vital in our marriages, and it's vital in our relationships with our communities and all of the Jewish people, because Baruch Hashem, every Jew is in a different world and has their own window. How many Jews are there? 15 million Jews, 15 million windows. And number 7, we have to remember at last that God didn't choose us only as individuals. He chose us as a nation. We're one people. Tzibur, the Chidah says, is Tzibur, Tzadikim, Beinanim, Rishayim. That's the acronym. We're one people. The Jewish people are not made up of one genre, one type. They're made up of all types, of all categories. That's what comprises the nation of God. And therefore, if God loves every Jew, how could I not? Somebody who says they love God but they don't love Jews, how does that exactly work? Imagine you come to my house, you say, Rabbi Jacobson, I love you, but I hate your kids. Get out of my house. A Jew wakes up in the morning and says, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, and then I go out of shul and I'm mean to somebody. God says, you said you love me and you don't like my kids? If you don't love me, if you don't love my kids, how could you love me? How can you have a best friend who loves you but despises your children? How does that work? I was once at a conference about anti-Semitism. It was in the South Carolina. It was a whole conference about anti-Semitism, and somebody gets up and says, Rabbi, I have a question. And the question they asked was, what's the difference between Jews and anti-Semites? And I was taken aback. What type of question is that? What do you mean, what's the difference between Jews and I said, what do you mean? And they said, they both don't like Jews. I'm like, that's a first. What's the difference between Jews and them? They both don't like Jews. And I looked at them and I said, I'll tell you the difference. I'll tell you the difference, okay? Go to any anti-Semite in the world. I'm talking about a civil anti-Semite. Some people quote Churchill, I don't know if he said it, as saying an anti-Semite is somebody who hates Jews more than necessary. But let's talk about somebody who doesn't hate Jews more than necessary, only as much as necessary. Okay, a civil anti-Semite, if there is such a thing. I'm not sure there is such a thing, but just for my argument here. Go over to this civil anti-Semite, let's call him a Balabatish anti-Semite, and say to him, what is your opinion of the Jewish people? And he will probably tell you, vermin of the earth. Bacteria, horrible. Really, why do you say this? Look what they do. Israel is guilty of everything. Even the oil Gulf spill in Mexico, if you remember, was Israel's fault. Of course, global warming, the climate change, of course, all the problems from Sudan to Syria, from Iraq to Iran, it's all Israel's fault. The Jews are just the vermin of society. You say, but I don't understand you. Your neurologist is Dr. Cohen. He's the best neurologist in the country. But your lawyer is Schwartz. He's a genius of a lawyer. But even your barber is Finkelstein. He's the greatest conversationalist in the city. He's been my barber for 65 years. But your CPA, your accountant, is Goldberg. He's an honest man. He wouldn't steal a nickel. Your cardiologist is Mr. Dr. Klein. Where do you get such a cardiologist in the world? He's one of the best, and he's a good friend too. What's your opinion of the Jewish people? A curse on society. What about all these Jews? They're individual exceptions. Some of my best friends are Jewish. Individuals, some of them are very good. Now go to any Jew in the world, okay? I guarantee you. Say, tell me, my dear brother, Tayyid Yid, what's your opinion of the Jewish people? Ay. I love the Jewish people. I love Klal Yisrael. There's nobody as beautiful and holy as them. Great. Now tell me about your brother-in-law. What's your opinion of your brother-in-law? Shmegegi. What about the guy who stands near you in shul? Low-life scum of the earth, a terrorist. What about the Gabbai? Don't start me. I could have him locked up for 29 years. What about the guy who lives down the block? Oh yeah, I wouldn't trust him with a dime. What's your opinion of the Jewish people? I love the Jewish people. The Jewish people are God's people, the holiest people in the world. So I said, you see the difference? The anti-Semite, he hates the Jewish people, but actually Jews individually, he likes them. He likes them pretty much. I said, with Jews, it's the exact opposite. The Jewish people, we love the Jewish people. But that individual guy, low-life, Shlemiel, Shlemazel, Nudnik. My grandmother used to say the Shlemiel pours the soup on the Shlemazel. The Nudnik wants to know what type of soup was it. You see, okay, that took you a moment. You see, it's very easy. It's very easy to love Klal Yisrael. It's not hard. It's an abstract, transcendent concept. It's much harder to love Reb Yisrael. But Klal Yisrael is made up of Reb Yisraels. There's no Klal Yisrael outside of Reb Yisraels. They're made up of individuals. That becomes a far greater challenge. And I always remember that moment. I was a little kid. Some of you remember it well, the miracle on ice, when finally the American hockey team defeated the Soviets in 1980. And they asked one of the players, how did the Americans do this? The Soviets, nobody can defeat them in ice hockey. How? And everybody said, Herb Brooks, the coach. What did Herb Brooks do? And one of the players once shared this story. He said, he took us, we were disjointed. There was no cohesion. There was no cooperation. And he tortured us. He had us practice for hours and hours and hours until we couldn't move our legs. We thought we were going to be paralyzed for life. One night, he did not let us stop for a moment after hours. And one of us turned to him and said, Coach, what? You want to kill us? You're going to destroy our legs. We won't be able to play. How much longer are you going to torture us? And he said, he looked at all of the players and he said, I will keep you here until you guys figure out that the name in the front of the jersey is far more important than the name in the back of the shirt. The moment you'll figure that out, you can go home. He said it was the turning point in our consciousness. The name in the front of the shirt is far superior to the name in the back of the shirt. We are all individuals. We have our own windows. But the name in the front of the shirt is far superior to the name in the back. Somebody sent me this guy had to say Kaddish. He had yahrzeit for his mother. He went to a wedding. He drank a little bit. He got tipsy, fell asleep. He wakes up 3 o'clock in the morning. You got to say Kaddish. What do you say Kaddish at 3 in the morning? Right? So you got to go. If you're in Bergenfield, you got to go to Zichron Moshe Shtiblach in Jerusalem because they have minyanim 24 hours a day. So he goes to Zichron Moshe, but it's 3 in the morning. Even there's no Ma'ariv anymore. So what do? A Yiddish cup. He calls up a car service company in Jerusalem. He says, send me 9 Jewish taxi drivers to this shul. Right? Say, 9? It's 3 in the morning. Who has 9? We have 3. Send me 3. He calls up every car service company he could. 3 here, 2 here, 3 here. He gets his 9 drivers. They all show up together. They come out of the car. 9 cars lined up with one man. They all want to kill him simultaneously. And you know Israeli taxi drivers on a good day in middle of the day, right? But this is 3 in the morning with one man. He says, okay, guys, relax. Put on your meters. Everybody put on your meters. I have yardsets for my mother. I missed Kaddish. Come in. We do Ma'ariv. It'll take 12 minutes. I say Kaddish for my mother. I pay each of you full price as though I took a regular ride at this time. It's all good. Put on the meters from now. Come into the synagogue. They come in. He davens Ma'ariv. He says Kaddish. They finish. They come out. He goes to the first driver. He says, tell me the meter. Let me pay you. And the man says, Atam Shugah? I'm going to charge you for honoring your mother and wanting to say Kaddish for her yahrzeit at 3 in the morning. It's a mitzvah. It's a privilege for me to be able to be part of this. And so every one of those 9 drivers refused to accept money that night in order to help this Jew honor his mother. And I thought, wow, how powerful. On the other hand, there was this fellow on El Al, and he's sitting in business class, and the woman comes over to him and says, would you like your meal? And he says, what are the choices? She says, there are 2 choices. He says, what are they? She says, yes or no. Right? Or there's somebody shared with me that there was this fellow in the airport, and he's sitting in the lounge, and he sees a woman over there taking a coffee, and he takes a liking to her, and he wants to meet her. But he says he's going to do it in a classy way. She looked like a flight attendant. So she decided he's going to announce, one of those mission statements of those airlines in order to attract her attention. So he gives a scream. He's like, we aim higher. And she gives him a dirty look. And he thinks to himself, okay, it's not Delta. So he's like, comfort first. Another dirty look. Okay, it's not JetBlue. He's like, wherever you want to go in the heavens, we were there already. Another dirty look. Okay, it's not American. So he's like, the sky is our home. At this point, this was U.S. Air. At this point, she turns around. She says, are you Meshuggah? Are you crazy? With your slangs and your mission statements? What are you doing? You're completely insane. This is horrible. This is despicable. This is disgusting. He says, El Al. So we have 2 sides to us, and they're both very real. There's the name in the front of the jacket. There's the name in the back of the jacket. It was a great Litvish Rabbi Katz. He once said, I fly a lot. Fortunately or unfortunately, I fly a lot. And I always see an interesting thing. You know how Jews are with doctors, right? You know how they are? It's like if your relative needs a surgery, you don't just open a telephone book, a surgeon, and you call him. No. You, la creme de la creme. Yeah, you call Rabbi Marty, you call every askin in the world. You need to have references. You want the best of the best of the best. You'll fly to Japan, but you need the best. I never saw even Jews who are very, very, hypersensitive and hypochondriacs and paranoid. And a Jew once told me, he said, Rabbi, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean the whole world is not out to get me. They are out to get me. I never saw a Jew, before going on a plane, call the airline, call El Al, call American, call British Airways, find out who the pilot is, when he graduated, get references of 10 Jews who flew with him. What's a takeoff? What's a landing? How does he deal with turbulence? Come on! Yeah. And Jews, let's face it, Jews are restless on airplanes. Do you know that? They're restless on airplanes. That's a fact. They're restless. The other day, there was a guy flying El Al to Israel. You ever did that? You know the experience, right? He sits down and he decides he wants to sleep for 11 hours. But how do you sleep for 11 hours with Jews on an airplane? So you know what he did? He made a sign by his chair, and the sign read as follows: I have no sushi. I don't have baby wipes. I don't have pacifiers. I don't have bottles. I don't have sponge cake. I don't have herring. I don't have an art scroll Gemara. I don't have a siddur. I daven mincha. I daven ma'ariv. I don't want to daven shachris. I don't know the zgulos of the Baba Sali if you feel the plane is exploding. I do not have any books. I don't have any literature. I don't have a bencher. I don't have applesauce. I do not have a Tehillim. I don't have a Chakli Yisrael. He thought 11 hours sleep. Falls asleep 5 minutes later in his ribs, right there in the rib. He looks up, 11-year-old kid. Read the sign. Boy says, I read this sign. Read it again. I read it again. I still need something. He says, what? Tzedakah for the vision at Tzedakah. Tzedakah for the vision at Tzedakah. Baruch Hashem, you know what it is. There's 2 dimensions here. Yeah. But an interesting thing, I never saw a Jew looking for references about the pilot. I ask you, putting your life in the hands of a pilot is less risky than putting your son's life in the hands of a surgeon or your own life? Why here endless research and here not? You know the answer? The answer is very simple. A surgeon, if the surgery is unsuccessful, God forbid, what happens? The patient may not survive. What happens to the doctor? Even the best doctor, a wonderful doctor, he feels bad, he goes home, life moves on. You got to deal with other patients. But a pilot, if he doesn't know what he's doing, and the plane is going down, you're not the only one going down. He's going down right with you. Such people we trust. There are 2 types of Jewish leaders. There are pilots, and there are those who are a little more detached. What's the uniqueness of my friend Rabbi Marty and his organization? One life is not just one life. It's seen as a life that affects the whole world. It's seen as priceless, as valueless. It's a different type of caring. There is a caring where I do my best, but I go home. The pilot is with you. It's a different experience. I'm going to conclude with this story I heard from Rabbi J.J. Schechter. He shared this with me. He heard it from the man himself. There's a man in Israel, his name is Aryeh Eldad. Aryeh Eldad has a very interesting job. He visits Israeli high schools, graduating senior year, and helps students acclimate themselves to the new reality of going to the army. Not easy for a teenager just graduated high school, being drafted 3 years into the Israeli army. So he goes around from school to school. He helps the kids adjust to this reality. And Aryeh Eldad, some time ago, was given a group of particular youngsters who were supposed to go to the army next year, but they were very, very resistant. And they had this cynical attitude, and he really had to acclimate and make them feel more comfortable. And he always takes the teenagers, he takes them on a trip to different places in Israel, and he ends off the trip at Har Herzl, Mount Herzl, where thousands of the soldiers are buried. And this particular group he took to Har Herzl. And you know, if you've been there, there's a section for soldiers who were killed 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, 1982, etc., and the subsequent wars, Hashem Yinkum Damam. And as he takes this group of boys to the section of 1948, there is a grave there. And the grave has the day of the yahrzeit, the place of the death, but when it comes to a name, it just says Almoni. Almoni means the anonymous one. So they said, Aryeh, who's this man? And he told them the story. The story is there was a Jew. He lost his family in the Holocaust. He survived. He made it on one of the illegal ships to to then called Palestine. Right then, the War of Independence broke out. He landed, they gave him a gun, and they said, we need you to fight. And one of the bloodiest battles in 1948 near Jerusalem, he fell. 1 day later, he was killed together with 69 soldiers. It was a famous battle. They buried them. And when they buried him, the tragedy became clear, the double tragedy. Not only was he killed, they did not know his name. He arrived, they drafted him to war. Perhaps the boys in the platoon knew his name, but they were all dead. There was no parents, there were no relatives, they were all killed in the Holocaust. So here was a man, they knew his yahrzeit, they saw his face, his body was there, but there was no way to identify him. Nobody knew who this boy was. It's crazy. So they buried him. Ad Hayom, you can go there. Poi Nitman, Almoini. Almoni, the anonymous one. Almoni comes from the book of Ruth. Bruce, Ploini Almoini. There it says Almoini, the anonymous one, the one who we don't know. And the boys were very moved by this. And you know, they're high school kids, so they turned to him and they said, Aryeh, who says Kaddish for him? Who says prayers for him? Who remembers him? And he says, nobody, there's no family. He's here and I come to visit when I bring the boys, but there's no family to learn for him or give charity for him or say Kaddish for him. There's nobody associated with this. And they listened. And life moved on. They graduated high school. They were drafted to the army. And Aryeh almost forgot the story. A year later, on the day of his yahrzeit, that boy's yahrzeit, Almoni's yahrzeit, Aryeh Eldad gets a call. Who's on the phone? The boys whom he took last year to the grave. And they said, you know, today is the yahrzeit of Almoni. He's like, oh, wow, it's 1 year. And they said, Aryeh, matzanu hamishpacha shelo. We found his family. He's like, you guys are crazy. You didn't find his family. It's been 70 years, more than 70 years. You have not found his family. How do you find his family? You can't even do DNA testing if you would like to. Who are you going to match it up to? You have DNA. Who are you matching it up to? You're going to test 7 million citizens and figure out if there's a fourth cousin? There's no way. There's nothing to do. You can't. There's no even a tfisa to find his family. They said, no. We looked the whole year. Matzano hamishpacha shelo. We found his family. He said, you guys are crazy. They said, today is his yahrzeit. His family is coming today to the grave. Come to the grave. Aryeh Eldad is very curious. He comes to the grave, and who's there? All these boys are there. And they turned to him and they said, Anachnu hamishpacha shelo. We are his family. They said Kaddish at the grave. They learned Mishnayos at the grave. They gave tzedakah for him, and they said, we're going to observe his yahrzeit, because Anachnu hamishpacha shelo. We are his family. In my mind, this story captures our eternal and timeless power. The fact that no empire can ever defeat us is a fact of history. We're still here. But the one greatest danger that could defeat us is the inner split and fragmentation. But when you have Jews who rise up to the occasion, and remember that the name in the front of the shirt is far more superior and important than the name in the back of the shirt. And we could say 3 words, Anachnu hamishpacha shelo. You're not anonymous, because we are your family. Then we know that that bond is eternal and that redemption will yet come, because with that unity we remain indestructible. And what better symbol of that unity, of that Ahavat Yisrael, of that caring for another Jewish life, for that unborn baby, for that struggling mother or her family, that we heard from Rabbi Marty, so eloquent. What greater symbol of this unity of 18,000 children who have been born in the schus of this organization. May we always be able to personify this state of consciousness, this state of awareness, to be able to connect on that level. As Rav Soloveitchik says, even if there's many heads, but one organism. Thank you very much.
Gabby Ganor here. Are you here? Is there a Gabby Ganoria? Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, please, there is plenty of food. There are pledge cards and envelopes that Jack and myself will take. Ashrecha to Harav Jacobson. Okay. I'm asking if a lady by the name of Gabi is here. Is she here? Or she left? Okay, the surprise, but unfortunately she had to leave early, was a woman. Is she here? A woman who is a nurse who just came back from Israel and Yetz Hashem is expecting in 2 months, came tonight, and she was a volunteer, a nurse, in our office for 7 months. Fortunately, she had to leave early, so that's why I kept asking for her. Ashreichem, and thank you very much.